Good evening, everyone. Welcome to my weekly Node-RED development live stream. Great to have you. If this is the first time you're watching, spend an hour or so, give or take, working on some element of Node-RED project development. So this is more about developing the Node-RED project itself rather than how you use Node-RED and that type of thing. Do this every Monday. If you're watching on YouTube, get the replay up soon afterwards. Do leave a comment. Do say hi in the chat. Softy2k. Great to see you. And So, what are we up to this week? I don't know. I've been a bit all over the shop doing lots of different things today. So, I think we're gonna. Given I spent a bunch of time last week doing the npm node install hooks, I think because that's moved forward a bit, and based on some feedback, there's something else I need to look at on that. So I thought, rather than to dive into something brand new, I'd go back and look at that a little. Because I left it a little late to get started today. I just need to fill for a moment or two whilst I sort out my workspace so I can share it with you guys without showing you stuff you don't need to see. So let me just get this code. I've started working on a couple of the issues in the Node-RED 2.0 backlog, other ones. One around how we handle authentication and how we store tokens in the editor. But that's one I think I need to noodle through a bit without an audience before we get too carried away with it. So let me just stash away a work in progress bit of code, and then get myself a clean workspace and hope you've all been well. The sun has been out. It has been a nice warm week, and it looks like it's going to continue here in the UK. And the kids are back at school today, so all is good. Right, I think I'm almost there. Close those windows. Move Slack out of the way. Probably want to have a browser somewhere. Yep, I know you can't see anything yet. It will all appear very soon. One more click. And here we go. Right, let's switch things around. So hopefully, yay, that's worked. Don't think I've left anything behind. Cool. Well, here we go. So what are we doing? So if you were here last week, if you've watched last week's video, we're looking at how we, basically there's a requirement to be able to add some custom code around when we install extra modules in Node-RED, specifically in the scenario when we want to embed Node-RED as part of the Electron wrapper. If you want to install any modules that have a binary component, you have to run an extra Electron tool to rebuild the module suitable for the Electron environment. So we want to provide a way to provide hooks in the code so that if you're creating an npm package, an Electron wrapped version, then you would be able to make use of these hooks, for example. So where did we end up last week? Well, I'll tell you the truth. I accidentally lost all the code I wrote in last week's live stream. I did one git checkout too many and overwrote all the changes. But that's okay, because I ended up redoing them and redoing them better. And I'll show you a little about what it looks like now. But the basic design is just as we worked through on last week's stream. So there are 4 new hooks using the hooks API: pre and post install and pre and post uninstall. The install hooks get past an object that looks like this. So the name of the module, the version to be installed if it's specified, the URL to install from if it's been provided, the directory we're going to run the command in, then whether it's an existing module or it's upgrading a module that we already know about. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the details of what those mean. I need to write some more docs about what those actually mean. Well, what is existing means. It is a bit of an internal implementation detail leaking out there, which we may or may not need to leak out. Then the uninstall hooks provide module and directory. Now, handling errors, this has changed slightly from last week. So we now say if either of the install hooks throws an error or returns a rejected promise, then the install will be cleanly failed. And by that I mean, so if pre-install throws an error, then the install fails. If post-install throws an error, at that point in the lifecycle, you would have done the npm install. Well, we will now do an npm remove to remove that module. The tricky bit of that, which I've just kind of realised, is if you're doing an upgrade, then you probably don't want to do an npm remove because you need to go back to where you were. So that's an edge case to think about. If the npm install itself throws an error, such as a 404 because you specify a duff module name, then we won't trigger the post install hook. If pre-uninstall throws an error, then the uninstall will be cleanly failed, as in we will report back that we failed to uninstall. If the post-uninstall hook throws an error, we'll log that fact, but the uninstall will still complete cleanly because we can't roll back an npm remove after it's been completed. For example, if the original install happened because someone uploaded a tgz file, once we've done the npm remove, we don't have that original tgz file, so we can't reinstall it. I think that all seems reasonable. Again, I'm not aware of any specific requirements around the uninstall hooks, so I'm not going to sweat too much about the specifics here. I think this is a reasonable first pass of semantics. In terms of the code, what actual changes? Now, 13 files changes sounds a fair amount, but let's see what happened. Well, in fact, what I'm going to do is let's collapse them all. So the main thing we did is, if you remember, with the hooks API, I spent a bunch of time dealing with the fact that the hooks trigger API is callback based, but we're trying to call it from in the middle of a bunch of promise based code, and getting the errors to flow through correctly got a little hairy, shall we say. So one thing I've done is I've updated the hooks API so that when you call trigger, when our code calls trigger to trigger any hooks that exist, you specify the ID of the hook you're triggering, the payload that needs to get passed through the triggers, and a done callback. What we've updated it to do is I've made done an optional argument, and if you don't provide a callback, we then will return a promise. So it sort of makes it an async function without it being an async function, because we don't want to explicitly say it's async. Otherwise, that would create unused promises and it'd just be silly. But it means if you want to use callbacks, you can. If you want to use promises, you can, which just makes it a bit nicer to integrate in code that's already promise-based. So if we go and have a look at the promise, I mean, most of these changes are just tidying up the references to the hooks, having moved where they exist, and the unit tests for them. Test. Unit test. Right, where are we? So installer, here we are. So if we just look through the installer, if this comes across, so this is where we do the npm install, or this is where we previously did the npm install. You can see now we create the trigger payload, which you saw us create last week. We then trigger pre-install. If that passes, we then run the exec command. If that passes, we then do post-install. And then if all of that works, and we can then do the post-install processing of our own, load up the node module, set all the flags, do whatever we do. But if there are any errors, now this is where it gets a little confusing because there was a catch block before and it's kind of merged now. Something we now say, and it's part of the API, is if a hook throws an error of any sort, we set a property on that error called hook, which is the ID of the hook that error has come from, which is a little hacky, but it means I can have this one catch block. And if we get down here and we've come to an error and error.hook is set, then we know it was either the pre or post-install hook that failed, so we can log it and create a new error that can get thrown back up. And here we check to see if the hook was post-install. We actually then run the npm remove of the module, which is goodness. If hook wasn't set, then this is output. This is an error coming from our running the npm install command. And this is all the logic that was there before, parsing the output to try and spot the common failures that you can get along the way. So in many ways, it's much neater than the callback tangles we were getting in last week. The clean path is much clearer. So pre-install, exec, post-install, and bring all the error handling down below. Cool. So what we're going to... okay, so that's good. Now, everything I've described there works on the assumption that all you need to do is run some custom code pre and some custom code post, but that the npm install will still get invoked no matter what. Some of the feedback we've had on this PR from Yoko-san, who's been looking at doing some Electron packaging, he actually wants, rather than have us run npm install as a child process, he would like to be able to programmatically invoke npm, because I think for the way he's looking at doing it, he's added npm as a package JSON dependency of Electron, so it gets installed that way, rather than shell out. Now, I'm not convinced that's necessarily the best way to do it. I don't know. I've not spent time looking at it, but it raises a requirement for being able to replace all of the install code, which kind of was the original goal, being able to replace the custom install code. But with the hooks API, it lent itself better to defining these pre and post hooks, because a lot of the time, actually, you're going to want to run npm install. You don't want to have to rewrite that code. But he has raised the point about, okay, well, but what if he does want to rewrite that code? How could we support that? So what he suggests is, well, what if the pre-install took all responsibility for doing the install, and then could it pass something back that told the code to skip running the npm install, not to consider the install as having failed or rejected, but just to tell it to skip running the npm install. And that's what we're going to look at tonight, because we've got a precedent set for that with the message routing hooks that the message that the hooks API first came from, and I can't quite remember the semantics. So yes, here we have. Just looking through. Right, here we go. Because in the message routing code, there is a requirement that you might want to stop any further processing of the message. For example, if you have decided you need to route this message to a different Node-RED instance, maybe this pre-route or pre-deliver, I forget which is the right one. Anyway, yeah, one of those, then you don't want it to carry on trying to deliver the message locally. So what we say there is, if the handler wants to stop further processing, for example, the remote router would not want a message to pass on to the local router, it must either return false from the trigger, call the callback function with false, or return a promise that resolves with the value false. Okay. So there we have the semantic that if you just want to stop it dead in the tracks, you return false. I guess the question is that an appropriate pattern for the install case, where we still want the install to carry on? We don't want to stop it dead in its tracks. We just don't want the npm install command bit of it to run. But let's have a look at what that would look like in the code. Yeah, let's look in the code. So, installer. Let's just make things a bit more readable for you. Go find, where do we call? So here's where we do the hooks trigger pre-install, and you can see at the moment we don't expect any payload to come back from that. Now, I think in this instance it's reasonable to say if the pre-install doesn't want the install to, if the pre-install wants the install to be failed, it should throw an error. So I think it would be reasonable to say for it to return something, and for it return saying if it returns false, then the npm install won't get invoked, but the remaining code will, because this is the internal code that has to happen once the files are on disk. This is the work that has to happen for Node-RED to pick up that module. So yeah, so I think what we're saying here is yeah, we're going to say if result is strictly equal false, so it has to be false, it can't just be it can't be null or undefined, because it will, if you don't return anything, it will be null and undefined, and that's good. So if you explicitly return false, then we can run the npm install. And we best otherwise just trace skipping pre-install. No, let's just say skipping npm install. Cool. Yeah, so then that's going to return, and then that will flow straight down into the post install, and then that will just carry on straight through. Yeah. So I think that's going to do it. I mean, I was kind of expecting it to be a bit more involved, but then, yeah, that's going to allow the pre-install to do all the work. As long as it returns false to say don't run npm, then it's going to pass straight through. Whilst we're here, there's actually two places where we do npm installs. This is the external modules code. So this is the new feature in 1.3, which manages npm modules for the function node. We've actually got exactly the same sequence going on in here. Again, for the sake of, I know there are only trace level messages, but and as I write this code, I think I got the logic the wrong way around. Let's just go back to installer. Yeah. If the result is not equal to false, then run the npm install. Otherwise, skip it. And so here, for the external modules one, if the result is not equal to false, then carry on with the install. Otherwise, skip it. And then this does the same work. Cool. So let's just have a look at the installer tests. So these are some of the new tests that I've added for this feature in the installer unit tests. So a simple test that checks that the pre and post install hooks do get invoked in the right order. Then testing the various fail scenarios. Why have we got? We appear to have two tests that are identical here. That looks like a copy and paste error. Yeah, those are absolutely identical. So I'm just going to delete that. Well, no, in fact, I'm not going to delete that. I'm going to reuse the body of it. I'm going to say skips invoking npm if pre-install returns false. Okay. In fact, what we're going to do is, so rather than throw an error, we're going to return false. But what we need to make sure, it's one thing, so at the moment, if you look at this error case, if my pre-install hook throws an error, and all the test does is it checks that exec.run, which triggers npm install, doesn't get called. And that's fine, because that's verifying it's stopped at that point. But now, I was about to say, well, in fact, it's exactly the same logic. Rather than throw the error, though, we return false, and then verify that exec didn't get called. But slightly different now is we want, in this case, we want to make sure that the post install hook has been invoked. In fact, yeah, this might yeah, that's quick and easy. So let's run that unit test. So where are we? We're in Mocha test unit at node-red registry lib installer, and those tests all passed. And there you can see skips invoking npm if pre-install returns false. So for the sake of just good old test-driven development, let's just revert back the change in installer and rerun the test. And there you can see expected true to be false. So yeah, always better to have a failing test that you make work, so you know your code change is being tested, than it is to make a bunch of changes, write tests, and all your tests pass first time. It doesn't really give you the confidence that the tests are actually testing anything. So there we are. Well, that's good. Let's, whilst we're here, go do Same test for external modules. I don't think I was as thorough. Yeah, I wasn't as thorough in the unit tests for the external modules file. Apparently there's fewer conditions to worry about, but I think we can, if we just copy paste that, cause previous, cool. Skips npm install if pre-install returns false. That's all good, that's all good, that's all good. Pre-install return false. Does a bunch of work. So now this line, exec.run called should be true. Well, we're saying that should be false. We shouldn't call exec.run, but everything else should still pass. Ooh, and got to run. Got to run. So skips npm install, check. So that's there, and let's do the same thing as I did. Let's just comment out that new function. And the test fails. Expected true to be false. Then we implement the new feature. And the test pass. Cool, cool. Oop, not to you. All right, well, let's get that committed. Allow pre-install hook to return false to skip npm install. Yeah. Now, for some reason on this new laptop, because I signed all my commits, it takes like quite a few seconds for Git to invoke GPG to sign my commit for some reason. I seem to remember I had that on my old laptop, but I haven't yet been able to track down whatever fix I made or whatever fix is needed that I did last time that's needed this time. Okay, good. So that's done. That's let's share the news with Yokoi-san. So I've updated the API so that if pre-install returns false, it must be false, then the npm install will be skipped on the assumption the pre-install has done all the work. Good. Nice. Well, there we are. Record time. That was. So, yeah. Something else I've done, which so we're getting more APIs like this that are not well documented. And we need to do something about that, particularly with 2.0 coming up. I'm keen to improve our API documentation and not just documenting individual functions, but just the general how you understand what APIs you can use in what context and where. If you go to the Node-RED website and go to the, navigate there, docs, API reference, then the Node-RED module APIs. So this week I've put up the module APIs for 1.3. It's an entirely manual process. It's ripe to set up the GitHub action to automatically publish every time we tag a new release, to automatically add its auto-generated API docs to the site. That might be an interesting task for for another day. We'd had some feedback that the footer for the API docs was out of date. So if I go back, you can see here, this is what the website footer looks like. Low code programming for event-driven applications. We've got the OpenJS Foundation and all their blurb, and that's what it should look like. And if you go into any of the old docs, you get the old style one. And that's because the JS doc template that we generate for the documentation had all of that hard-coded in, which was kind of nice in one regard, in that I'm just trying to remember. This will be a master branch now. It was kind of nice because you can just run grunt docs, and it generates, if you go into the docs directory, it generates all that HTML, and you could just open it up. Okay. In fact, let me go back to where I was, the npm install hooks, because this hasn't yet had the new stuff added. So if I run grunt docs here and then refresh, what's going on? Oh no, okay. Sorry, let me get back to I'm going to stay right where I am. I'm in the install hooks. Right. We have on GitHub a JS doc template. Let me go and find that. So this is, JS doc is the tool we have. We run against the source code. It pulls out and automatically generates the documentation based on the comments in the code. This is a bit of a handful. Took me ages to tweak to try and get the style right, but it was generating the full pages so that you could just open them, generate it locally and browse it locally. What I updated it to this week, because if we generate the full pages and then just dump them in the website repository, it doesn't pick up any of the template or the styling of the website. So it's a maintenance headache. So I updated the main layout. If I just go back in history, in fact here, September last year, I updated the docs footer. Let me show you what that looked like. So previously, our layout, which is the main page, you can see it's got all the HTML, header, whole bunch of stuff, and the footer and yada yada, and it's all hard coded in. Well, what we've now got, if I get back to today, rather than spit out the full page, it now spits out a template which uses the which takes advantage of the Node-RED website templating engine, Jekyll. So it generates its content with this YAML header, which we can copy into the Node-RED website repository, and then when the website gets built, it gets built with the proper style put all around the page. And that's much nicer. So it ties in. So here's the old style, 1.0. Now if I go to 1.3, you can now see it's got the breadcrumb bar. It tells you what version of the documentation you're looking at, as it does in the sidebar here, and it's got the right footer. And if we make any updates in the website repo for the footer or the header, these docs will automatically pick up those changes. So it's just much nicer. So that's good. But I think there's a bunch of work to be done around the consumability of these docs. It's quite, docs just need more and more work. So at the moment, these docs are intended to be this is the documentation if of all the different modules that make up the core of Node-RED. But that's not necessarily what the user needs, or at least it doesn't make it easy for the user to find what they need. Because typically a user is going to be writing code in one of perhaps 3 contexts. The first context, and by far the most common, is they're writing a node. So let's pull up inject.js. So they're writing a node, and this is in their runtime file. They get passed in their constructor function, the red object, which is the handle to the Node-RED runtime API. And there are various functions available to them that they can use. But nowhere have we really fully documented what that red object contains. It can be inferred, but it's not necessarily as straightforward. So, for example, you basically get a stripped down version of these various APIs presented to you. It's just not clear. The other context in which people will write code, and would reasonably expect there to be some sort of documentation, is again in the node, but this time the node running in the editor, not in the runtime. So again, when you're running, well, unlike the runtime side where we pass in this red object, when you are creating the HTML for a node, this red is a global that already exists in the browser. And again, there's a whole bunch of APIs, and there's a lot of different APIs. In fact, the way you do the same task in the 2 places can be quite different. In part because in one side you're dealing with the runtime view of the world, whereas in the editor it's the edit time view of the world, and they can be different. And the types of things you want to do are different. So at the moment we have absolutely no JS doc for the editor. So that's something we're going to do, and I'm not going to bore you with working on that now. But particularly with the plugins feature, which is again has the same access to the API as nodes do. It's this red object. You've got that to worry about. And then the third, I think I'm up to the third. The third place is if you're embedding Node-RED itself in your own Node.js application and you do a require of the Node-RED module, then this is what you get. So that's the one that we've actually provided documentation for, but it's more of the edge case than any of the others, writing nodes, writing plugins. So we kind of do a disservice to node authors by not having that stuff well documented today. And also things like the runtime hooks. You probably saw, I referred to our design doc for it because it's got this handy diagram. It's got probably far more detail at the moment than our documentation of the hooks API, because at the moment the hooks API is fairly bare bones in terms of what we document. We document how people can add and remove hooks. We don't talk about how you can trigger hooks. Now, we wouldn't expect third-party code to be triggering hooks, in that the hooks are kind of meant to be internal. Triggering hooks are meant to be ways to extend the Node-RED runtime, so it's for the Node-RED runtime to trigger them, and for external things to add and remove code to be triggered. But for example, here when we say callback, it just says it's a function, the callback function for the hook. It doesn't say anything about throwing errors, being async, returning promises, and then somewhere we need documentation on all the semantics for all the different hooks we're adding. Likewise, there are the events component. So it's a standard event emitter, but there are some things in the runtime that are exposed as events rather than hooks. And there is an explanation in this design note about what is the difference between an event and a hook. So events are notifications that something's happened, like nodes started, nodes stopping, that type of thing. And the event handler can't have any direct influence on the event, whereas hooks are handlers that are actually inserted in the code path and are able to influence what happens as part of the processing. So, that's the difference between events and hooks. But again, we don't have anywhere that's well documented, so we need to do that somewhere. Okay. So what are we going to do next? So we have got the Node-RED 2.0 planning board, trying to keep track of what's going on. You can see there's lots of stuff in progress. Most of these now have pull requests that are open to be reviewed and merged. So I think actually pretty much everything in the in progress column is awaiting review. There's lots of other things going on that we want to make some progress on and want to try and get merged. Hopefully get a lot of it merged this week. I'd quite like to get to the point where we can do a beta of 2.0, even if it doesn't have everything. Get to a beta of 2.0 sooner rather than later. Because of some of the potential breaking changes, the longer we can have it in beta, the more chance we can get people trying it. Will be great. It's the usual challenge of how we get more feedback on this stuff when people tend to wait for the full release rather than try the beta. So, for example, let's just trying to look through what sorts of things are toggling default values from enabling features by default, like the function external modules we've just added in 1.3. We'd like to enable them by default in 2.0. I'm holding back on that for the moment. I'd like to get a bit more user feedback from the community on them, but we'll see how we go. In fact, pull RB into core nodes and rebrand as filters. So I know that's already happening. In fact, if we just go to pull requests, I think, here we are. Dave has done some work on that, although he didn't label it. 2.0, stick it in the project. In fact, why don't we, for the next 10 minutes, have a look through what Dave's done here. So this is in progress. So the RBE node, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. If not, let's run it up so you can see what we're talking about. The RBE node is the report by exception, which is what RBE stands for, which has always been a bit of it's one of those terms that if you know it, you know it. If you don't, you would have no chance of guessing it. But it is a well-known industry term, but that doesn't mean it's has high usability factor. So the RBE nodes is report by exception that lets you block messages if a property of them has not changed. So you might have a sensor sending a value of 10 constantly, but you only want to know when it's changed rather than that it's still 10. So the RB node is a quick and easy way of putting in that sort of blocking with some rules around. You can set rules for how much it can change. So allow it to be a percentage or exact number. So let's say your temperature is 10, and you'd like to know when does the temperature increase by 10%. So you can put in 10% here, and then compare it to the last valid output. So if we sent 10, then that would keep blocking until the thing reached 11, which is 10% more than the 10 you'd sent before. Anyway, it's a really useful node, and it's currently in its own npm package. So it isn't it's not maintained in the core. It is maintained as its own npm module, but because it is so useful, it is actually one of the few in our package.json. It is one of the ones that we install by default. Now, having these extra nodes as external modules is actually a bit of a pain in some scenarios, particularly when you're embedding Node-RED and you want to completely replace our palette with your own nodes. These nodes are actually a bit of a pain to deal with in that scenario. So what we've decided to do for 2.0 is to pull RBE into the core. And that's what that's what this PR does. It pulls it in and it removes sentiment and tail. Now, grumble. That removing those two probably should have been a separate PR, but that's just my preference to try and keep things single concerns in a pull request, particularly when it's these 2.0 slightly bigger changes, but that's no worries. And then Dave has just grabbed the files from the external module and copied them into our source tree. So yeah, copy them over as is. There's including all the translations. So we've got lots of translations in German, English, Japanese. Why is this one in? Right, Dave. Why is that pulled in? I think Dave's based this on. I need to work out. I think Dave has not based this on the latest dev. I think. There's one commit. Yeah. Okay, it's not entirely as clean as it ought to be. But not to worry. And yeah, so it's moved all over. Now, he did say he's pulled it in and he's rebranded it. So the thing we've talked about is we were going to relabel this node as filter rather than RBE, because it's a bit more of an intuitive term for people to find, and at least when they browse the catalogue to see what it looks like. So somewhere in here, yeah, we're not changing the type. The type will still be RBE, so everyone's flows will still work. But we're adding the palette label, which lets you customize the text that appears in the palette rather than so rather than say RBE, it will now say filter, and the icon will be the same. But yeah, you can probably see why this is the sort of thing we do at a 2.0 jump. Just whilst it shouldn't break anything, it's for people familiar with RBE who, people familiar with RBE, they may not spot that. So what I'm going to do, 2944, git pr 2944. So this is a custom git command I've got that pulls down this pull request into its own branch locally, which is dead handy. Run grunt dev. Hopefully you'll get away with not running an npm install. Great. So first thing to note is here you can see this, and this is the specific thing I wanted to check to see what it would do. Because I've got Node-RED Node RBE installed, that it has correctly warned me that that type's already registered. Now, for a clean install of 2.0, you wouldn't get that error because Node-RED Node RBE wouldn't get pulled in. So and when users upgrade, that node will actually get removed by the package.json rules. So that's all goodness. But I did want to sanity check what does happen if you have it installed. And as you can see, it's done the right thing. If we reload, so if we now search for filter, so there's the filter node. Okay. So edit filter node, that's goodness. So here you can see I dragged it on and now it says RBE, so that's a bug. You need to fix that. If a user searches for RBE, because we haven't changed the underlying type, then you can see it still says RBE. Now, what is curious to me, can you see, can you see here, it identifies the module it's come from as Node-RED Node RBE. So I think that is an artifact of me having the Node-RED Node RBE module installed. I think it has got slightly confused over where that module's come from. And you can see over here, well, that's interesting as well, the node help is displaying RBE rather than the palette label. So it ought to say filter there, and it ought to say filter there, I think. I think it's right that these things should reflect the palette label. Okay, now some of those are going to be bugs in core of Node-RED to fix, like the help sidebar. The fact it says RBE on that node there might be something. That's going to be in its label function. Yeah. So you can see here, it does a bunch of, what's it doing? Yeah, okay. This dot underscore is a message catalog lookup. So you can see it's looking up rbe.rbe. So if we go find the message catalog, one of these, don't go back, go forwards. One of these buttons collapses them all, there we are. So if you look at the message catalog, rbe.rbe is filter. Oh, that's curious. That is curious that that comes up as filter. I think these are artifacts of me having Node-RED Node, the module, installed as well. So let's do an npm remove of that. Yeah. And let's run again and see. I think it was picking up, even though Well, that's fine. That's goodness. Let's reload Node-RED. Right, let's just do those same checks. If we search RBE, that's good. That's filter. We hover. Okay, so it does say filter, and you can now see it says Node-RED and the node type RBE because that's not changed. Good. If I drag it on, it says filter. Good. Yeah, I think they just got slightly confused with the message catalogs. Okay, so it's still a bug over here. You can see in the help index, it's using the node type rather. It's ignoring the palette label. So we can fix that, and it says RBE there. So there are two places where it's using the raw type rather than the palette label. Yeah, okay, let's go fix them. Let's go fix them, and what I'm going to do actually is a git PR done, which removes that pull request branch because Dave's not using a personal branch, he's using one I can check out his branch directly, pull in RB and push out tail. I mean, it's a descriptive branch name, I'll give them that. And yeah, so now I can make some changes and push them back to add them to the pull request, which is fine. So what do we need to do? There was the help sidebar, not using palette label if it's set. That's what we need to go find. Tab help. So where are we? Let's just give you a guided tour. We're in at Node-RED, editor client, source, JS, UI. So this is all the editor code. Tab help, because it's the tab help we are about to fix. So this is what builds up the sidebar tab. Help index. Oh, here it writes subflows. Bear with me, I'm just mutter to myself for a moment whilst I. Okay, get node label. I think that's what we need to. Get node label. So that creates a div with the right icon in, and then it sets the text to either the name or the type. But I think what we want, curiosity does end.name. I think that might just be a hangover from where I've copy and pasted this code. Yeah, it is. See, yeah. So what we can do is, yeah, I don't think it's ever going to have name, but I'll leave that for now. And if its definition has got a, what was it, palette label? RB HTML, there it is, palette label. Yep, that's good. Let's just make sure everywhere we call get node label we have _def defined. Yeah, cool. All right, so that's run. Yeah, it would have been slightly neater if he hadn't mucked around with better if those changes weren't in this file, but but I bet, oh, sorry, I'm muttering to myself. Okay, I think it's okay. I think Dave's actually picked up something that I overlooked, so, but it still would have been better to have done those changes separately. Right, let's reload RBE and filter, so you can see it shows up under both names here, which is good. Let's go look in the help. Cool, so it now says filter, which is what we want in the help index. So now we've got the help text down here, where we've got RBE in the title up here. So let's now just go fix up the display of that. Show help for a given node type. Okay, so here we're saying show us the help for this given type, but we literally just have the type. So we just have a string that says RBE at this point. And here you can say we set the title to be that node type. What we don't have is access to the node definition to find out, does it have a palette label? But we can do that. Can't remember how we do that, but we can. If we so in the editor, we should be able to get anyone's type definition. red.nodes.registry.get node type. Does that do it? Yeah, that does it. So we go and get its def, and then we'll set the title to be We need to be a little defensive here, and say if def title equals, oh no, we can be defensive, but def and def dot palette label. Cool. So we'll set the title to be if def exists, because there might be some fringe edge cases where we're displaying a node type we don't have in the registry. I don't think that can happen, but for the sake of just sanity check, it will save my blushes when someone hits the edge case that I haven't. So if we have the definition and that definition has palette label, then we'll use palette label. Otherwise, we'll just use the raw node type. So let's see what that looks like. RBE, good. Let's go look at its help. Cool. And there it says filter. Nice. Okay, was there anywhere else that said RBE that probably should say filter? No, it says RBE down there, but it's meant to say RBE down there. If I were to do a search for filter, that's good. It came up. So the search knows to search palette label as well as node type, so that's good. If we look at the outliner, filter, that says filter, good. Fine, yeah. No, I think we're all good here. Yeah, I think we're all good. So, just say use palette label if set in help sidebar. Why not? So the only other bit now is that slight quirk of if you had Node-RED Node RBE installed, then slightly funky behavior. So I'd wonder whether we should have Node-RED Node RBE on a built-in deny list, and we'll just refuse to load it now we know it's been pulled into the core. I'm going to think about that. I'm not going to do that one unilaterally. But yeah. But I think that is about it for tonight. Yeah, as you can see, we've just got a long list of little things just to well, some are big. I've kind of been putting off some of the bigger ones, but like the HTTP request node, that is going to be, I'm not looking forward to that, but I feel I kind of need to start working on that one pretty soon. Basically a complete rewrite of the HTTP request node, trying to keep it as API compatible and unmodified as possible for all of its handling of following redirects, cookie handling, yada yada. Yeah, there's just so many things that node does, and I've got to re-implement it into all using another underlying npm module. So I don't relish that task, but we've known about it for a year. Now's the time to get it done. Yeah. Otherwise, we will be doing a 1.3.2, or no, I think we're on 1.3.3 now, aren't we? Hold on, let me. Version numbers start blending into each other. Yeah, so we've done 1.3.2. We will be doing a 1.3.3 in the next day or so. In fact, I think I've fixed all the outstanding bugs that we know of. So yeah, 1.3.3 will happen tomorrow. And yeah, carry on with 2.0. And that's going to be me for tonight. So as ever, thanks everyone for joining in. Always great to have you here. If you're watching the YouTube video, please do like and subscribe. If you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, I realise I still haven't done a 1.3 release notes video. Yeah, it kind of gets to that point where I feel has enough time passed that is it worth still doing one? But then the completist in me kind of wants to do it. You'd be ashamed to miss one. But anyway, there we are. Otherwise, see you all next week, and have a good week. Enjoy the sun if it's sunny where you are. Enjoy whatever it is if it's not. And I'm frantically trying to find the right button so I can end this stream without wittering on too much. You can still hear me, even though I've gone to the end screen. But now I'm going to mute and say good night.